Welcome to the Redemption Church podcast. The audio you're about to hear is a recording from a sermon given at Redemption Church in the Twin Cities, Minnesota. If you'd like to join us for a service or learn about our church, you can find more information at redemptiontc.com. We hope this sermon is an encouragement to you and helps you to know and follow Jesus.
That's awesome. So we are continuing this series in Romans this morning, and we spent 11 chapters unpacking the most beautiful picture of who Jesus is and what we believe as Christians. And last week, Austin did a great job transitioning us into the next section, which is, in light of what we've seen in these first 11 chapters, how should we live? So let me just recap kind of the transition moment in Romans 12, 1 through 2. It says, I appeal to you, therefore, brothers, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, that by testing you may discern what is the will of God, what is good, acceptable, and perfect. And so what we have here is this exhortation for us to look at the mercies of God. So Paul describes the first 11 chapters of Romans as displaying the mercy of God. So what we believe about God is that God is pursuing and loves sinners. Remember Romans 5:8, God demonstrates his love for us in this. While we were still sinners, Christ died for us. And in light of that, what we do is we present ourselves to Jesus. The picture I get when I read that passage is a picture of a marriage ceremony. I always love, as a pastor, standing next to the soon-to-be husband as his bride walks down the aisle, and everyone, like, you know what you do when you're in that scenario, right? Like, you look at the husband's eyes, and then you look back at the bride, and you're seeing, is he going to cry? Like, what's about to happen here? It's such a beautiful moment, right? And what we have is Jesus saying, listen, I want you. Like, I want to marry you. Like, I'm standing here, I'm waiting for you. And he's asking us to present ourselves to him. And the way that we present ourselves to him is by living in and according to his will. So here's what we're going to see this morning, a specific way that God wants us to respond to his love for us. We're going to see that God's will is that we love as we have been loved. So a specific aspect of walking in the will of God, probably the most important one that's laid out for us in the Bible, is that we live lives of love. And so the first way that we see we're called to live this life of love is we're called to live a life of sincere love. Look with me at verses 9 through 12 of Romans 12. To begin, it says, let love be genuine. Abhor what is evil, hold fast to what is good. Love one another with brotherly affection. Outdo one another in showing honor. Do not be slothful in zeal. Be fervent in spirit. Serve the Lord. Rejoice in hope. Be patient in tribulation. Be constant in prayer. So we've got this one-liner, which I think as we unpack it, it's very exposing and convicting to us to let love be genuine or let love be sincere. So I just looked up what this word means. It means free from pretense and lies. It means a love that's non-hypocritical, authentic, so that your emotions and your actions and your words all line up. In a lot of ways, this is the opposite of Minnesota nice. Right, where you pretend one thing, you promise one thing because you're trying to be nice and then you don't follow through on that thing. This is genuine, sincere love. It reminded me of this quote by this musical artist by the name of Rich Mullins. I'm taking a trip back to the 90s here to my house at 131 Blueberry Lane, where my mom would blast Rich Mullins. And he has this line in one of his songs that's always stuck out to me, where it says, "There's people been friendly, but they'd never be your friends. Sometimes this has bent me to the ground." And I think we've all been bent to the ground by that reality, right? Where somebody's two-faced. They're showing love for you, but it's not genuine. It doesn't turn out to be real. And so we're left with this question: am I loving people, or am I using people? Am I demonstrating and displaying the type of love that we see from Jesus in the first 11 chapters of Romans? Or am I counterfeiting that? Am I pretending to be a loving person while I'm really holding back? What we're also going to see is that love is not a positive feeling of energy that naturally overflows. I think that's sometimes what we think of. It's like this electric shock that goes through our bodies that just automatically comes out. But it's something that's rugged, and it takes a lifetime to cultivate. And it's not something that we ever arrive at. I don't think we ever in our lives say, okay, I've crossed the finish line. I used to be an unloving person, and now I'm a loving person. So what Paul does is he takes us through kind of, I'm going to call it like a proverbial litmus test of whether our love is genuine. And there's sort of these little pithy sayings that he has about what it looks like to live a life of genuine love. And the first one I think is a little bit surprising to us. The first one, he says, is that we're to abhor what is evil. Kind of an archaic word, abhor. And it just means hate. Right? So he's like, if you're going to be a loving person, here's what's got to be true in your life. You've got to hate what is evil. Now, when we think of evil, we might think of like devil horns and something kind of like almost comic. But when Paul talks about evil, he's actually already defined what evil is. In Romans 3:23, he said, all have sinned, that's all have committed evil and fall short of the glory of God. So to fall short of the glory of God is to not give him the honor that is due his name. So what's evil is to put yourself at the center of your life. When your object becomes for people to think well of you, for people to celebrate you, it becomes your success, it becomes your money, it becomes you centered. So, in other words, what's evil is sort of the normal American life, the goal that people have, their own personal autonomy and freedom. What is glorifying and honoring to God is when we put him at the center and our life becomes about worshiping, honoring, and serving him. And so we're first and foremost, if we're going to love others, put in an irreconcilable war against ourselves. We constantly have to hate this impulse that all of us have to pursue our own wants, desires, and loves above worshiping and serving God and worshiping and serving others. So we hate what is evil in us. And then the second thing is we're to hold fast to what is good. And so this question, what is good, has been asked throughout history, and you can see a lot of different answers to that question throughout the Bible. But I think the most succinct one that I can think of is in Micah 6:8. And somebody actually asked the question, what is good? What's the good life? What does it mean to hold fast to what is good? And God's answer is to act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with God. So if we're going to hate what is evil, we can't just have a negative be what drives our love as Christians, we've also got to hold fast to what is good. That means we act justly. We do what is right. When there's a Y in the road between what's wrong and what's right, we do what is right. What's right is the loving thing to do. We love mercy. In other words, the biblical picture of being good is not being self-righteous. It's being merciful to other people, which means we're quick to overlook the faults of others. In our pursuit of love, we're not competing with others. We're seeking to serve others, and then we walk humbly with God. It just means we have a real, genuine relationship with God, which then overflows into relationship with others. The next thing that Paul tells us to do is to check our own heart. If we're going through the motions, action without brotherly affection, our love is not going to be genuine. And so he's saying, hey, along the way, you might be doing the right things. You might be going through the right motions. You might be engaged in community. You might be coming to church. You might be spending time in God's word. But what you might notice is that the affection that you have for the people around you is starting to diminish. And he's saying that's like, the check engine soon light on your car going off. It's like there's actually a problem there. Because the commandments of God are not just to go through the motions, it's to love your brothers and sisters in the church from the heart. What actually binds this community together, what binds this family together, is when we truly and we genuinely love each other. So Christianity is never just about the outward action. Christianity is about the heart. And this is like a consistent and constant thing that we've got to do as Christians. This is why it's actually so important for us to walk humbly with God and spend time in His Word daily, because we're so prone to self-deception. We so easily get off track and we start to do things out of duty rather than doing them from the heart. The next thing he reminds us to do is to show honor. Okay, so this is really important because if you start demonstrating some love through your life, what you might be tempted to do, if you're anything like me, is you might be tempted to feel really proud of yourself after a good day of loving people. And you think, I'm really a loving person. And then you think, right after that, I'd like to be recognized for that. Like, why isn't anybody seeing how much a loving person that I am? But Paul says that impulse doesn't come from love. That impulse comes from that evil desire to put the spotlight on yourself. So he says one way to check yourself on that is to show honor to other people. That means a truly loving person is not going to seek to put the spotlight on the fact that they're a loving person, but is going to spotlight the grace of God at work in other people's lives. The most loving people are the people who are least self-centered and are most prone to praise other people. You leave the presence of a loving person, they make you feel great about yourself. Okay, here's another encouragement for all of us as we seek to walk in this life of love. Paul says, make sure that the person that you're serving first and foremost is the Lord. He says, don't be slothful in zeal, be fervent in spirit, serve the Lord. Now, why is that so important? If you are primarily serving the people around you, you'll run out of gas really quick. Because the people around you can't give you what you need. They can't give you enough encouragement. They can't give you enough pats on the back. They can't refill your tank. So love is going to deplete you. But if you're serving the Lord, not serving people, we've learned throughout Romans that God isn't looking for us to give him gifts so that we can pay him back. But from him and through him and to him are all things. So when we serve the Lord, what happens is there's always a fresh supply of strength. There's always a giver who's got our back and is helping us love others. So God is calling us to serve him as we love others so that we're not left depleted and feeling alone. The next thing he says is make sure that you rejoice in hope. So our love for others is expressed in this life, but our hope has to be in the next life. Because here's what we find. When we genuinely try to love the people around us, it is an absolute mess. Right? Like people sometimes think, right, you get involved in the church, you get involved in community, and like the deeper the dive that you take, the more utopian it is. That is not true. Like, the more deep of a dive you take, the more real it gets. It's like, it becomes like family. Like we say, it's like family. And some of you are like those of you who have really close family relationships, even you're like, oh no, it's not like family, is it? Not like really like family. And it's like, no, it gets really like family. And so Paul's saying, listen, we can't rejoice at the end of the day in the circumstances of our lives, even in the best things, because we were made for the next life. And so as we're on this pathway of loving others, we've got to have our hope grounded in the next life. And just kind of piggybacking off that, he says, so be patient in tribulation. So what do? It's a mess. We're waiting for the hope of the next life. There's an aspect of biblical Christianity that is so realistic. You embrace the grind. It's a grind. Jesus looked at his disciples in the eyes. He said, in this world you will have trouble. There's going to be problems. It's going to be a mess. It's going to be hard. And our response to that is to be patient. To be patient with ourselves, to be patient with one another, and to realize that our life is like a mist that appears for a little while and then vanishes. Jesus is coming back soon, and in the meantime, we are to wait on him. And so our relationship with him then, as we seek to love one another, is to be constant in prayer. The more mature you are as a Christian, the more dependent you become on God. Sometimes we think, okay, if I arrive in Christianity, I'll arrive at a place of independence where I'm able to walk in a life of love apart from relationship to God. But a life of love is like the relationship between a branch and a vine, Jesus said. He was so bold as to say, apart from me, you can do nothing. And the sap running between that vine and that branch is prayer. And so there's this constant conversation that's got to happen between us and God in order for us to live out this life of love. Okay, so here's what I bet's happening in you. It's the same thing that's happened in me as I've been studying this text. It's exposing. Like, it's this beautiful life. Like, who can argue with any of these things? Who can say that this isn't a beautiful life? Like, who wouldn't want to live this life, but who does live this life? And there's only one person that I can think of who ever consistently and actually lived this life out, and his name is Jesus. And I think that where we've got to land on this is the best way to spot a counterfeit is to know the real thing. So I looked up just the different aspects of U.S. currency that helps you spot a counterfeit. Did you know that within like our money, there are things like color-shifting ink, 3D security ribbons, security threads, watermarks, micro-printing, and red and blue fibers. And so if you want to be able to spot counterfeits, what you've got to be able to do is hold up $100 bills to the light, and you've got to be able to spot all of those different things. And here's what's happening, I think, to all of us, is it's like, oh, rejoice in hope. Be patient in tribulation. And what actually begins to happen as you get a picture of this life of love is you realize that's not really me. Like the genuineness of this, even though Jesus is at work in my life and he's living in me, I can't at the end of the day rest my hope in me. So counterintuitively, what leads us to genuineness and a life of love is to admit that we do not possess on our own the genuine thing. It's only Jesus. Jesus is the real, genuine lover. He's the one who lives this out perfectly. And so we put the spotlight on him. We worship him. We follow him. We ask him to fill us with love. And then what's produced in our life is a life of actual love. You know, this is a remarkable statement that Peter, one of Jesus' closest earthly friends, made about him. So Peter was on a 3-year camping trip with Jesus. He saw every single aspect of Jesus' life. Like, he saw Jesus in the morning when most of us are cranky. He saw Jesus in some incredibly tense and difficult situations. And this is the statement Peter made about Jesus. He committed no sin, neither was deceit found in his mouth. Here's what was so amazing about following Jesus. There were only marks of genuineness in him. And so Peter worships him. We're called to a life of sincere love that we don't arrive at, which is purposeful, so that we worship Jesus. So that's the first thing we see, a life of sincere love. The second aspect of this love that we're called to in response to God's love for us is a life of generous love. Look with me at verses 13 through 16. Contribute to the needs of the saints and seek to show hospitality. Bless those who persecute you. Bless and do not curse them. Rejoice with those who rejoice. Weep with those who weep. Live in harmony with one another. Do not be haughty, but associate with the lowly. Never be wise in your own sight. So that first word that sticks out is the word contribute. So we're called not to ask in our community what other people can do for us, but we're called first and foremost to ask, how can I help others out? And I think when he talks about contributing to the needs of the saints and seeking to show hospitality, he's zooming in on one of the great loves of American culture, and that's money. And so what contributing to needs of saints and seeking to show hospitality both have in common is they're going to cost you monetarily. You have somebody into your house, you're paying for the food, you're paying for the drinks, they might get some mud on the carpet, they might wear out your furniture faster if you end up having them over a lot. And obviously, if you're giving money to other people, you've got to, in a sense, impoverish yourself in order to benefit them. So when the Bible talks about generosity, it involves money because Jesus said, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. So question I have for you, what does your money say about who you love? Does it say that you love God and you love other people, or does it say that the main priority in your life is yourself? The second aspect of generosity that he talks about in this text is being emotionally generous. So he talks about rejoicing with those who rejoice and weeping with those who weep. Now, in a community of faith, this is incredibly difficult. Because think about our church. We're a young church where lots of transitions are happening in people's lives. So think about the number of people every year in this church who are meeting, dating, and getting married. Okay? And everybody who's getting married is really excited about that. And everybody who has a roommate who wants to get married and isn't getting married creates this complex dynamic. And so here's what happens. The person who's got the good thing coming in their life is called to weep with the person who doesn't have it. So there's an emotional sensitivity that doesn't just say, hey, you should be rejoicing with me. You should be happy with me. But the person who's weeping, who's upset, like, I'd like to be getting married, is not just to be sad and morose and wanting the other person to climb in that place with them. They're supposed to be able to come out of that place to some degree in order to rejoice with their friend. Okay, this one might even go a layer deeper, right? There's also, I remember in like 1 month's time, I don't know how Jennifer Tuttle knew this, but she told me that like 17 babies were going to be born in our church in 1 month's time. Okay, that's a lot of babies. But here, for every baby that's born in our church, there's a couple struggling with infertility. There's a couple that can't get pregnant, or there's a person who's had a miscarriage. And so you've got a connection group happening, right? God, everybody, we're pregnant. And someone else is sitting in that group, and they just lost a baby. And they were going to share that, but now they feel like it's emotionally impossible to share that. And we're called in the church to know each other well enough and to be sensitive enough to each other that this actually works. That we actually live this out. That we have enough kind of awareness of what's going on in the lives of other people that we end up not burning bridges with other people, but living in harmony with one another. Which is why I think this last statement that Paul makes is kind of a summary statement of this section. He says, do not be haughty or proud, but associate with the lowly. So we need to be monetarily generous, we need to be emotionally generous, and we need to be humbly generous. So do we have enough humility, enough self-awareness, enough approachability that other people would be able to come and have that hard conversation with us, that we would be able to feel for people that's lives aren't going as well on the surface as ours are? Or do we have enough humility to understand that it's a blessing from God, even if I'm not the one who's receiving that blessing? I think another question that this statement brings out for us is, am I friends with people that I wouldn't be friends with if I didn't know Jesus? He says we're supposed to associate with the lowly. So that means we've got to have friends that the world would say, hey, that relationship's not really going to benefit you. That's not going to help your network. That's not going to help you climb the ladder. That's not going to make you successful in this life. Okay, so what would keep us from living this type of generous life? What would keep us from living this sort of outward life? And I think that it's fear, isn't it? We think if we're this generous emotionally and financially, that we'll end up being so depleted that we've got no life left to live. And Jesus would speak to us in that heart condition. He would say this, for whoever would save his life will lose it. But whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. Here's Jesus' promise to all of us who feel like we already don't have the resources to live a happy life. He says, here's the key to you being happy. Give your life away. Do the exact opposite of what you feel like doing. Don't hold on. In another place, Jesus gives this hilarious analogy. And he says, unless a grain of wheat falls into the ground and dies, it remains alone. But if it dies, it bears much fruit. So he says, here's what we're like if we don't generously give our lives away. We're like a seed that's afraid to jump in the ground. It's like, but I'm going to lose everything. If I jump in the ground, I'm just going to get buried and I'm going to die. Like the whole purpose of a seed is to be buried in the ground. The reason it gets buried in the ground is because when it gets buried in the ground, it dies, which is its very purpose. But in its death, it produces fruit. What if our happiness is on the other side of our obedience to God's commands to live lives of generosity? Okay, now here's where the text just takes this turn. It gets so real. It says, not only are we called to live a life of sincere love, of generous love, but a life of radical love. Look with me at verses 17 through 21. Repay no one evil for evil, but give thought to what is honorable in the sight of all. If possible, so far as it depends on you, live peaceably with all. Beloved, never avenge for yourselves, but leave it to the wrath of God. For it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord. To the contrary, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he is thirsty, give him something to drink. For by so doing, you will heap burning coals on his head. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. Okay, so far, we've been focused on the community of faith. And here's at least where I'm at this point in the text. I'm already convicted. I'm already like, okay, I got a lot of work to do. Got a lot of prayers to pray. I've got a lot of rejoicing to do. Like, there needs to be some serious change in my life if I'm going to really be living a life of love in the community of faith. And then Paul's like, oh yeah. Also, if somebody outside of the community of faith does something really evil to you, and keep in mind, he is writing this letter to a persecuted group of people where people are regularly being dragged out of their community and burned at the stake or crucified. And he's saying to them, listen, don't ever return evil for evil. Don't try to get back at anybody. What? Like if we can't even love the people in our connection groups or our spouse or own family members, how in the world are we supposed to love our enemies? And then here's the question that I think all of us have as good Americans. We're like, is this even a good idea? Like, never repay someone evil for evil? Here's what I want you to realize. Jesus is not an idiot. Okay, I think sometimes we think like Jesus gives like really good spiritual advice, but it's not good practical advice. But here's what Paul says. I want you to give thought to what is honorable in the sight of all, what is beautiful, what is commendable, what actually matters in life. So I think what he's asking us to do is think through a real life situation. Okay, so imagine that you accidentally cut someone off in traffic. A complete accident, you didn't see him, you didn't really do anything wrong, but you accidentally cut him off. You pull into a parking lot, they follow you into the parking lot, and they are not Minnesota nice. They are real Minnesota mad. They are flaming mad at you. And they rip open your car door, they pull you out of the car, they grab you by your shirt, they slam you up against your car, punch you in the face. But let's say you feel like you could take them, or you've been taking Taekwondo or something like that. This is maybe your moment. You see somebody filming on the side, you're like, this is maybe my moment. Like, I could get back at them. And let's say, okay, let's play out the different scenarios. You punch them in the face. You get back on them. You do the exact opposite of what Jesus says here. You Do repay evil for evil. You go home, your head hits the pillow at night, and what do you feel? Oh, man. Why did I do that? Like that was, like you're still going to feel gross about it. You're not going to feel like you won the fight, even if you did just, toast this 40-year-old dude in the Walmart parking lot. It's like, you're not going to feel great about that. Okay, but let's say the same thing happens. And let's say you just take it. You know that you could beat that dude up. But instead, you just say, I'm so sorry. You walk away. Do you know what? Here's what's going to happen. I think this is right. I believe the whole Bible's true, but practically, I think this is actually what's going to happen. You won the fight in a really profound way. Because what's going to happen is, for by so doing, you will heap burning coals on his head. He's going to be like, I just beat up the nicest guy in the world. That guy is going to lay in bed, and it is going to be like you are pummeling him with 1,000 punches in the face. And you are going to lay in bed with an absolutely clear conscience. This is genius. This is the way that we as Christians overcome the world. This is admirable. This is, I would say, why we worship Jesus. Let's walk through a text that I think displays this perfectly in the life of Jesus. Matthew 26, 47 through 50. This is the betrayal and arrest of Jesus. While he was still speaking, Judas came, one of the 12, and with him a great crowd with swords and clubs from the chief priests and the elders of the people. Now the betrayer had given them a sign saying, the one I will kiss is the man, seize him. And he came up to Jesus at once and said, greetings, Rabbi. And he kissed him. Jesus said to him, friend, do what you came to do. Then they came up and laid hands on Jesus and seized him. Judas comes, swords and clubs surrounding him, with pretense, not genuine at all, saying to Jesus, Rabbi. And Jesus, with all genuineness, with the ability to call down angels and destroy everyone there, looks at Judas and he calls him friend. Why did he call him friend? Because he was his friend. Jesus is the most beautiful person in the world because there is no retaliation in him. There is no flying off the handle. There is no raginess. There is kindness. To be in his presence is to be at peace because he is love. To be transformed into Jesus' image is not possible through direct effort. It's only possible if we're in his presence. To be loved by Jesus is to become loving like Jesus. See, we're the friend who's betrayed Jesus. We're the enemy. This is what Colossians 1, 21 through 22 says. And you, that's us, Christians, who once were alienated and hostile in mind, doing evil deeds, he has now reconciled in his body of flesh by his death, in order to present you holy and blameless and above reproach before him. That's the gospel. Our anger against God resulted in the death of Jesus, which is the greatest demonstration of his love. We, who were enemies, have become God's friends only because he is a loving person. Let's let our hearts melt in the presence of such a great person so that we see simultaneously his beauty and the pettiness of the bitterness that we have against other people. Let's pray. We'd be transformed. God, as Christians, we want to be like this. We want to be the type of people that don't repay evil for evil. We want to live lives of genuine love. We want to be generous, not holding back, not filled with grudges and regret. But if we're honest, our track record shows we can't do that on our own. God, would our eyes quickly move from our own sinfulness and depravity to your beauty? Would we see that even in this place of being exposed, that you love us? That we were once alienated, enemies, hostile in mind, but now we've been reconciled. We've been brought into relationship through you because you said to us, my life for yours. Jesus, how can we stand at the foot of the cross and judge others? How can we stand at the foot of the cross and not be loving toward others? God, would you change us day by day, humble us so that we can be vessels for your use, God. In Jesus' name.